a sin center. Both cities were great commercial centers, and I always thought he liked Ephesus probably the most because he kind of, but he had to write two letters to Corinth, and they were trouble. Now, notice what Paul does on his first visit to Corinth. And that concludes that section. Let's move on to section verses 2 through 8. And found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came unto them. In the city of Corinth, he found this Jewish couple recently come from Rome. The reason they had left Rome was because of anti Semitism, which had rolled like a wave over the earth. During the days of the Roman Empire, during the days of the Roman Empire, this happened several times. At this time, Claudius commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. Among those who got out of Rome was a very wonderful couple, Aquila and Priscilla. Verse 3. And because he was of the same craft, he abode with them and wrought, for by their occupation they were tent makers. Aquila had come there because they were in business. They opened up their shop, and one day there came to their shop a little Jew who had traveled all the way from Antioch. They got acquainted, and they invited Paul to stay with them. What do you suppose they talked about when Paul led them to the Lord in the synagogue? There were others who also turned to the Lord. However, there was also great opposition against Paul among the Jews. Verse 4. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. And when Silas and Timotheus were come from Macedonia, Paul was pressed in the Spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus was Christ. Paul had written in Athens for Timothy and Silas to come, but they didn't show up. Now they come to him in Corinth and bring the report from the churches in Macedonia. When they got to the first Thessalonian epistle, we will find that Paul wrote it during this period, after he had received Timothy's report. Now he feels that he must speak out, and he testifies that Jesus is the Messiah. Now to verse 6. And when they opposed themselves and blasphemed, he shook his raiment and said unto them, Your blood be upon your own head. And I might ought to remember that whenever that it comes to people rejecting the getting out the word of God. Your blood be upon your own head. I am clean. From henceforth I will go unto the Gentiles. Apparently, it was at this time that Paul made the break that took him to the Gentile world. It would seem that from this point, Paul's ministry was largely to the Gentiles. We will find that true. We will find that true is Ephesus and less obvious in Rome. Verse 7. And he departed thence and entered into a certain man's house named Justus, one that worshipped God, whose house joined hard to the synagogue. And Crispus, the chief ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all his house, and many of the Corinthians believed and were baptized. Paul spent about 18 months in the city of Corinth, where he had a tremendous ministry. When the Jews oppose him, he turns to the Gentiles. We find now that the Lord spake to Paul because he is coming into a great dimension of his ministry endeavor. And that ends that section.